And welcome back to another great conversation here at Table Talk TV. Today we're going to be talking about what does love got to do with it? Shout out to Tina Turner. And biblical relationships. It's not just an emotion, but an action and a commitment. Talk about our biblical relationships with friends, foes, community, church, spouse, all those things that we're probably thinking about and what we think biblical relationships are supposed to be about. We're going to try to answer those questions today. We're going to have a good conversation. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about it. Well, the conversation begins. I know this can be a very expansive conversation, but I know it touches everybody's lives at some point. We want to know, what does biblical relationships look like? I know this is probably a strong drawl outside of the conversation we had last week, but I think it's just as important, and sometimes it's probably even more important because this is something we are dealing with every day in every facet of our life. It's just not a technical. It's something that can change your life in a second.
You're talking about love.
Love, biblical relationships. Because, yeah, we all think about relationships, but then it's like, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible want us to glorify God in the maximum state? Because ultimately, as a believer, that's what we should care about. What glorifies God the most, not just what we feel. A lot of times that's what we think. It's an emotion. Like I was saying in the intro, it's an action. It's a commitment. If you just go by how you feel, you may not be feeling it tomorrow.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's feeling is important. It's part of being human, and it's not that God doesn't want us to feel, but I think our feelings can get us in trouble. Can kind of lead us astray, especially if we give in to certain feelings. It could be problematic. So we do it to be careful, monitor ourselves, a little bit of discipline.
Well, it's tough with the government trying to tear us apart. It's almost like that song goes, "There's something in the way." You guys know what I'm talking about.
I can't wait another second.
And don't.
I've missed you every day.
Every hour.
Every heartbeat.
Yes,
Since the train pulled out.
that's some good
Come here,
symbolism.
you wonderful troublemaker.
I am here.
And let's never be apart
How
again.
society gets between men and women trying to have a decent relationship. Society is a cat.
Somebody placed that cat there too.
Yeah, it's a funny clip because it kind of illustrates the point that I wanted to make today about how relationships, and I think relationships in all of the different levels that host mentioned, I think they've all changed. We treat, and when I say we, I'm talking from a societal standpoint. I want to make a disclaimer that I know there are folks out there that are fighting the good fight and they're running the race and they're trying as hard as they can. This is the 20,000 foot view, I guess you could say, where looking at society in general and what's happening. And again, the idea of relationships, we can obviously see relationships breaking down because of the current political situation. People taking sides so passionately, which again leads back to the idea of feelings. If we let our feelings overtake us, it could interfere with a more basic need, which is that need for companionship and for fellowship. And even in the case of men and women having that relationship, because it's God has said that we need relationships. It's why back in Eden, I believe that's why He created a partner for man, because He said it's not good for man to be alone. But in a fallen world, that's going to get screwed up. It's going to get messed up, and as always, we mess things up. And if you look at things from a society standpoint, there's always been sin. There's always been there's always been problems between men and women. There's no question about that. It's gone through different phases. But it seems as though things have started to come more outwardly expressed. And under my observation, having been around for a while, it looks like during the 60s, we started to see a leaning from kind of a having respect for one another. And I'm talking about men and women at this point, having respect for one another in relationships at the very least, to going and thinking about the I, whereas if, whatever feels good, do it. And that means, well, whatever feels good for me, whatever I feel good about, I'm going to do it. But in the structure of relationships, that doesn't work. If you have two entities and one is just taking, that means the other entity is just giving, and that is not an equal symbiotic relationship. There has to be a balance. There has to be a give and take on both sides. And
They
it's
should
funny
both be
because
giving and receiving.
yeah, I mean, there was a pastor that gave advice to my wife and I before we got married, and he said, if everybody in the relationship gives 100%, then everybody's taken care of. And it's a good point. If you look at it from the perspective of what can I give, but if both of you are doing that, you're both going to get taken care of. But unfortunately, in society, we're not seeing things that way anymore. We're told to look at yourself. You're the most important thing. You're the most important person. You're the center of the universe. You have to take care of yourself. You have to look after yourself. Now, I'm not saying that taking care of yourself isn't important, but if you're going to expect to have a relationship and you're going to expect to interact with another human being, I think there's certain rules that you have to get straight in your head before you can do that. You can't walk into a relationship with another human being, and that includes, a friend. There are toxic friendships where, you're a friend with someone and, they just kind of, they take, and they don't give, and again, even something as simple as a friendship, that factor plays as well. And you can expand it out, expand it to your neighbors. You look at the two models, you have a neighbor where he's constantly borrowing things off, he's constantly asking for help, but when you need something, he's not there. But for a neighborhood to work, you're constantly sharing and helping each other. You see your neighbor out there and he needs a hand, you run out and help him. And when you're struggling, hopefully, if you say, hey, can you give me a hand with this? I got to move a sofa. Can you come over and help me move a sofa?
Well, what if they're a Samaritan? I mean, because really, who are our neighbors?
Talking about the outsiders.
Yeah. Well, you know what? If they're on this side of the grass and they're breathing, they're our neighbors.
Well, is there any passages that come to mind for you on this?
Well, I mean, scripturally, God said, love your neighbor as you love yourself. I mean, right there, he's kind of pointing out what we're supposed to be doing. If you do love yourself and you have self-love, then expand that out, extend it out to your neighbor. And yeah, I mean, neighbor is a figurative, I'm talking, when I mention neighbor and the idea of the people you live with in your community, that's one thing, but neighbor extends to literally every human being. It really does. And keep in mind, this is not going to be an easy thing. God never promised that living by his rules were going to be easy. And it's funny because I've come in contact with people who, aren't Christians that say, oh, well, you're a Christian, you got it easy. You just follow the Bible and you follow those rules and you got it easy. It's far from easy. It's far from easy, because what we're called to do is love people that we don't necessarily like.
You think that's why the Bible talks about in 1 John 4:18 that says perfect love casts out fear? You think that fear a lot of time is it's not, a lot of times we think about fear as in something like a horror flick or something. You're innately like a jump scare or something that's scary. But fear can play a lot of dynamics. Can fear also be getting out of your comfort zone or
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No question about it. I know that there is there's a prison um, uh, ministry, prison fellowship, and I give a lot of props to the people that are willing to go into prisons and preach to inmates. That you talk about fear. Um, that would be hard for me because of that idea that we're dealing with folks that have lived a rough life, and I don't necessarily, in my example, I don't know that I have that much in common with them. Like for me to go in and do that, I feel almost hypocritical. But there's that fear of not knowing, I guess.
a lot of times we
And
call
that's true.
that. I was going to say a lot of times we call that fear. Like we feel that in different ways, like anxiety. So you may feel that unknownness creates that anxiety or that fear. And I think the Bible tries to explain that, you don't have to perform love. You are loved. You are safe because you're in the arms of God. But we only think about this fear as in like some kind of punishment or some kind of like a jump scare or something, like a demon coming out of the closet or something. But a lot of times it's the simple things that are practical in the sense of how we experience fear, the unknownness of things. And we can be assured that perfect love casts out that anxiety, that fear, that unknownness, because you don't have to always know, but because you are loved by God. And for those who love God, all things good work out for those who love God. Not how you may think, but but what God sees as good for him, which is also good for you. So
Yeah.
I think that's also a play into that because a lot of times that fear is always seen as just some kind of negative connotation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the fear of embarrassment. I mean, think about just preaching. Talking about the word to people. You have that embarrassment that they may think you're weird or think there's something wrong with you. I mean, one of the most common things is, oh, you're just one of the sheep. You're just not even thinking about things. You're just following blindly like a sheep. And embarrassment is it's a human feeling. I mean, nobody really wants to feel embarrassed. Which again is why you pray to the Spirit to embolden you and to give you that strength to be able to overcome those feelings, so that you can spread the word. And I just wanted to touch on something that you were saying, host. I completely agree. That we have to keep in mind that things aren't always going to turn out exactly the way we want, but they will turn out the way that God wants. And sometimes that may lead to us being in situations that are uncomfortable for us and even painful. If I mean, again, it's for the glory of God, and it's not always going to be good. But the important thing is keeping that in your mind. For what reason is this thing happening? How is it glorifying God? And keeping in mind that it does have a reason. Everything has a reason. God has a reason for everything happening. And remembering that is important too.
I was going to say, I don't think you should sell yourself short when going to prison ministries. I don't think that they've experienced any more or less pain that you have in your life. They've gotten a fair share of handouts. In fact, if you talk with many of them, and I'm sure you have at some point in your life, you find that they had loving homes. When most people didn't have loving homes growing up, they had loving homes, a lot of them. Some people who had very abusive homes, they end up there too, but then they get handouts somewhere else in life. They get a lot of pleasures and satisfaction from things that they do. And that's why, again, they ended up there. And, prison and jail is not that bad, at least not nowadays. Maybe it was back in the day before the use. I mean, now inmates have phones and TVs and all kinds of free education. It's a free shelter, free food, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's not as bad as Hollywood portrays it to be. I don't think there's a lot of people who've had rough lives that never went to prison, and there's a lot of people who had very easy lives that went to prison, and vice versa. So I think my personal theory on all this stuff, and I don't want to get sidetracked on all this, but my personal theory is that everybody feels the same amount of pain at some point in their life, just in different gravity and through different durations, sometimes all at once. So someone may experience it all at once, but then have a really easygoing life for the rest of their life, or it may be dispersed through little pains throughout their life. I don't know. It's a theory.
Well, I have a phrase for that, a little coined idea. All things are fair, but not all things are equal. Equality is what we dream of. It's the utopian idea. But in reality, nothing's equal. But everything's fair because fair has to do with magnitude, scales, and perceptions. At that point, everything is fair based upon how you scale things. Of course, if I unscale something, then it looks really unfair. Like if I compare myself with Bill Gates or somebody like that, now it's unfair, but I made the error. It's not because it really is unfair. That's just an unskewed bias. I'm trying to compare myself with somebody like that. But in retrospect, I can't understand their reality. I don't experience what they experience. And so the idea of fairness is real when you understand the distribution of scaling. But what we want is equality. That's what the flesh wants. It wants equality, but that's a utopian idea.
Well, that it answers the question, that age-old question that Tina Turner posed. This is what love has to do with it, is you can actually level the playing field. We actually relate, human beings relate a lot more than we think we do on a level of pain and fear. So, just because you haven't been skydiving, you can imagine yourself going on a roller coaster or going over a bump when you're a kid in the car. You feel these butterflies. So you can relate on some level to a skydiver. You can relate to someone who had, again, an abusive childhood may have turned instead of turning to drugs, they may have turned to collecting board games or collecting books or whatever else. Instead of using the other means to get through life, people just pick different crutches to lean on. And so if you understand that base level, you can relate to anybody on a human level.
I think it does avoid that other problem. I'm not a married man, but I have a understanding and conceptualization about how relationships work.
Because you're married to the church.
Well, however people want to phrase that, but that's its own theological quandary. We can touch about the bride and all of that. But, the quandary is stuff like, well, host, you're not a married person. Why are you telling me anything about relationships? What do you know about marriage? What do you know about raising a child or anything like that? But that's because the perception is skewed again. It's like you're trying to compare the idea of like me and Elon Musk. You think that unless you're at this level, you can't understand any concept. But if that's the case, then we should start really being consistent with that and saying, well, we should be happy that Bill Gates and Elon Musk and all these people control all our society. Why should we say anything? They're the only ones who actually know that. We know nothing compared to them. So when you flip that idea, that's when you start saying, oh, that's not true. Well, then I would say, well, then that's not true. And this comes back to what is fair comparative to this utopian dream. I would say it's a carnal dream of wanting equality. Because that's ultimately the idea of the fallness is your equality is the derived idea that I want to be like God. I want to be as God. And this idea of equality is what causes men to be fallen.
Yeah, that's another good point. Like people thinking that they are truly unique. Like what I've experienced, nobody can relate to me. Nobody has any idea what I'm going through with my kids. Because you may have raised 2 kids, but you didn't raise 3 kids. It's like you can't give me any parental advice. Because I am on this higher level. I am on the seat of God. Like, I am holy, unique. And
that's why I know it's utopian, because of course Christ, he wasn't married or had relationships, unless you believe in some crazy Gnostic construct. But
it was Paul.
Right. Well, I guess that's assumptive. And if he was, then I guess you would have to say it was okay to leave his family. But, neither here nor there. The idea is even Christ was. And yet, again, this is that level of exception. Oh, but that's God. I was like, but we are all part of the priesthood. We are all a part of this function. And we're all given this truth and knowledge about the scripture. But once we start playing this equality game comparative to our understanding of fairness, and that's distributed in a way that we all can be participants in this faith, then we can avoid this thing. But it comes in different forms and factions. I may face it because I'm a single man, but other people may face it in other places. Well, maybe you don't have a high success in monetary functions. So what, you can't give somebody some monetary advice? Somebody goes, oh, well, you are bad with finances. That doesn't mean you don't know what the Bible says about it. And that doesn't mean you can't be instructed about the Bible. God can speak his truth no matter what. But if you only look at the constructs of equality, you may actually miss out on truth, because you're looking at the person and not the truth that's being distributed to you. And this is that, I think, a carnal construct of wanting equality. But, another passage is 1 Peter 4:8. It says, love your brothers, love one another, for love covers a multitude of sin. And so it's not just, you don't just dwell on the things people are doing, like the offenses and how they hurt me and what sin did they do against me. It's an environment of forgiveness. And what there's multifaceted to this thing. And there's also an exegetical and deeper construct to that. But the surface level is, this also goes to a fairness function. Like, we all have caused offenses. We all have done things. We all have, and in this passage, he's not specifying, well, this sin and that sin and other things. Like, Paul may talk about that in other places. But here Peter's talking about, love one another. Love your brothers. Because love covers a multitude of sins. So he's bringing it back to, don't look at the types or saying, at least I didn't do that. Don't be like that guy Jesus pointed out on top of the mountain saying, thank God I'm not like that man. He's saying love one another, because the distribution of forgiveness and sin is fair, and it's happened. And we made those choices. And so we have to remember that love is also a function of understanding somebody else's position and not just projecting ours on them.
Well, it also helps with forgiveness too. Understanding why someone hurt you, putting yourself in their shoes, truly figuring out what they went through. Hurt people. So if you truly understood, no matter how grievous somebody hurt you, if you understood what they went through, and then it helps you actually forgive them. You can actually see, wow, this is why they're treating me this way, because somebody treated them this way and somebody treated that person this way. So you understand now, and I'm doing the same now to my kids, or I'm doing the same to my brothers and sisters. I'm doing the same thing to my wife. And then you're going to want them to understand your position too, which we all do. Is like, well, if you understand what I went through, then you would understand why I'm treating you this way. We use this as a justification, but we don't give that same justification to other people. But yeah, if we did just truly love each other, then it would cover a multitude of sins, leveling the playing field.
Yeah, and I think that's where the gold is. That's the gold, because you get, if truth comes out of the mouth of a donkey or the mouth of babes, that sounds funny, but in some sense, truth is truth. And if you are projecting, you may lose that gold. You didn't get to hear something. God may be trying to really tell you something, but you're looking at this person saying, oh, that guy is a loser, or this guy, he doesn't know, he's not a scholar, or blah, blah, blah. And you lost it. You lost the ability because you still are the man on top of the mountain looking down. And
you're being judgmental. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that judgment also it's facaded by this illusion of love. Like, if you really love me, then you would listen to me. The projection is I have something to tell you. And so now we're creating these classes or categories of love or function of forgiveness or sins. And I think that's also a slippery slope too. But
being human is a slippery slope. I mean, just trying to exist. I mean, even if you're isolated, trying to exist in your own mind is tricky, but then trying to exist with other people in their minds, I think if you want to see a miracle from God, it's the fact that we're all existing in a society and not all curled up in fetal position, just the fact that we can function together. It does get a little crazy. I want to bring it back around to something that you were saying though, host, and actually colleague, you as well. And you were talking about forgiveness, which is a big factor in relationships. There's no question about that. But forgiveness, it's a really hard thing, and I think that ties in with something I mentioned earlier, where we've lost something in society, and that's the idea of sacrifice. And I think in order to sometimes forgive someone, you have to sacrifice your feelings. There's the phrase, well, I'm going to be the bigger person and I'm going to reach out and say, I'm sorry, or I'm going to go and say, I forgive you. And I think that idea of sacrificing your feelings, and even if, there's a situation where you feel you might be right, but how important is that in the relationship? It might be worth sacrificing your ego by saying, okay, well, I really believe I'm right, but this relationship is more important to me than stating the fact that I'm right. So, you make that sacrifice.
If I could add to that, I imagine it like if you get in a car wreck, or let's say somebody hits you in their car, they T-bone you, it was their fault, clearly their fault, and you forgive them, and you say, I'm not going to charge you a penny because I forgive this debt that you owe me. That, I believe, is a picture of true forgiveness, because all the times throughout the Old Testament even, God forgives his people over and over again, but they had to make these sacrifices, like what you're saying. They had to slaughter their animals. They had to give them the first fruits. They had to give them even sometimes devote their own children, like that lady, I can't remember her name. She dropped the prophet Samuel off at the temple as an offering to God, because he listened to her prayers. So she gave him her own son to devote him to the temple, which was the great prophet Samuel. But the forgiveness always looks like sacrifice. It's not free. It's not like, oh, we can just wipe the debt from everyone. Now, somebody has to eat that cost. And then again, you see the fulfillment of all these Old Testament scenes through Jesus, who didn't just say, all right, I'm here now, we can just wipe the debts clean, or I'm just going to fly up to heaven. No, he actually had to be beaten and killed so that we can be forgiven. It wasn't just this free gift. Somebody had, well, it was a free gift to us, but it cost everything. It cost him his own life.
Yeah, I would say, that posits a good question about a boundary, or I guess we could call it a line in the sand. Because if love covers a multitude of sin, at what point does covering somebody's offense or car accident or anything cross the line into like enabling destructive behavior or neglecting accountability? Because we don't want to be those people who says, yeah, everything's good, no accountability, no nothing. Consequences are real too. Church discipline is real also. And there's a lot of churches out there who don't believe in none of that.
Well, it is tough, because there's a point where Jesus says, if someone's trying to sue you, let them win. Let them have the case and pay them. But then he turns around later and says, if you don't somehow make amends with the person, if someone's trying to take you to court, settle the matter quickly with them, because before you get to court, because once you get to court, you're going to pay every penny. I don't think he's contradicting himself. I'm saying it seems like what you're saying.
But there's layers to that, because there's a discipline also for those who are in the household of faith.
Mm-hmm.
Should I sue them comparative to those who are outsiders? Because if you don't sue an outsider quick, they're not going to be compassionate. They have no means to. They're going to, you better sue them quickly. You better do something quickly, because these outsiders, they're going to do something very quickly. Yeah, of course, we may have different means of compassion towards the inside, but still, that's why there's a different layer. We have now church discipline. But the idea that there is no such thing as church discipline, that there is no room, because people use this passage, well, love covers a multitude of sin. God forgave me of everything. Everything's done. God doesn't see my sin from the east to the west. And the idea is that this leads to that old function of taking advantage of grace. And not only grace with God, but the grace amongst the believers. So you can habitually hurt believers and say, oh, I'm sorry. And then you just keep on taking advantage of this thing, because there's no church discipline, there's no accountability, there's no fine line in the sand saying, this isn't godly. You can't keep doing that. There has to be a layer where there is some kind of boundary. Because if there isn't, well, then, you're going to lead to abuses.
Host kind of really hit it on the head there. I mean, that's, the thing is that idea of forgiveness of our sins is between us and God, right? I mean, that grace is that's a divine, godly grace between us and God. And then you talk about, that grace between human beings and the idea of forgiveness. So, the forgiveness that God gives us is absolutely perfect. Whereas the forgiveness that we're dealing with one another, that, again, because it's a fallen forgiveness, I guess you could say in a certain way, there's going to be complications with it. And yes, I think there's a difference in level between dealing with believers, because there is, again, we have a set of rules that was laid down to say how we're supposed to deal with things with our brothers and sisters in Christ. But then there's also civil laws, which, again, there is nothing that says that Christians aren't liable to civil laws. As a matter of fact, it's the opposite. We should be following civil laws as well, as long as they don't contradict our biblical laws. So your example that you used, colleague, which, man, you definitely threw me a curveball. If someone were to T-bone me, yes, I would say the Christian thing to do would be, yes, I forgive you, it's all good. But civilly, there are laws. And if that law was broken because of this situation, like, let's say, negligence, like the person ran a red light, it means they broke the law. And because they broke the law, there's consequences. And that consequences, in this case, is they are responsible for the compensation to repair the damage that they did because of their actions. So I think forgiveness is important, but there is consequences, and in some cases, compensation.
Yeah, so we have to do something with these passages. We can hyperbolize them or spiritualize them, but there's a lot where we're repeatedly told in the Old Testament and the New Testament to forgive each other's debts. And it's not just in these contexts, it's not just believers forgiving believers' debt, because Jesus says that's what the Gentiles do. You guys should be better than that. If someone hits you in the face, you need to don't hit them back. If someone sues you, give them your coat too. They take everything you own, give them even more. And I know some people try to interpret that as, he's talking about centurions specifically. That's not the case. That's not the cultural background of that, what he's saying there. But the whole point of this is what he says too when he's teaching his disciples to pray. He says, "Forgive one another, or else you're not going to be forgiven." So by God, so he connects this. The forgiveness that we have for each other should look like what God did for us, which He ate the cost on our behalf. So we should do the same. And he actually says, he turns to them and says, now you do the same. So you should be forgiving each other. Maybe it's God's discipline towards you that you're getting sued, even if you're in the right. To which David would cry out, God, vindicate me, O Lord. You know, he says that vengeance, God says vengeance is his. So if I'm revenging people, you know, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, and Jesus said I'm not going to teach that. He goes one step deeper. He's not abolishing it, but he's fulfilling it, saying we should be better than that. You should, if you're going to live eye for eye, tooth for tooth, you don't have to. You can actually forgive. So if someone knocks your tooth out and you forgive them, then you inherit these heavenly rewards. I
think it gets to a deeper quandary if you're going down that parallel, because there's the civil function. I guess it depends, you know, how somebody takes. We've talked about two kingdom, single kingdom ideology, but you know, laws are here because of order. And in the Old Testament, it was the same thing. There are. You see a lot of these exterior laws because there needs to be some structure of order. And that law creates this construct of fear of the consequences. And how can you really have love in the sense that you can, without experiencing the damage of fear, that actually causes you to have a healthy valuing of someone else's graciousness. If you've never had the damage of fear, it's really hard to appreciate somebody's generosity. So the structure itself of order has to be defined by a boundary, a dichotomy somewhere. And so I agree with what you're saying, but there has to be a layer to that. If it's in every sense, that means the civil laws have to be abrogated.
Well, I don't think so. It actually complements the civil laws. If you don't get a speeding ticket for speeding, then yeah, God's discipline may show up in another form.
Yeah, but the construct is that that's not my forgiveness.
Well, what I'm saying is that answers the previous question you were saying about what if people take advantage of it. And again, the answer is vengeance is God's. So yeah, we should. If someone's taking advantage of my forgiveness, God's not going to let that slide because he's going to see that.
I guess what the difficulty becomes is, you know, the logical quandary. You have to have men creating laws. Because, yeah, we could say God then is the ultimate law distributor and punisher. But then that negates the fact. It would be like, well, then why do we even have men creating laws at all? God will do it anyway.
Because God instituted the judicial system. There's a whole period of judges even when there wasn't a king.
Right, but we don't have to live that way today.
What I'm saying is there's always a judicial system that's instituted by the scripture. But then for us common people who are not judges, because we're like 99% of the rest of the population, he says you should be forgiving each other.
Right, that's to one another. But the idea is that we have to replicate the equality of function so that there's laws, like even inside a household. If you have a house, each house has their rules of living. And the idea is that these are the rules, and you tell your children these rules, and then you execute a consequence if they break those rules. Are you going to just say, hey, I'm going to forgive you and not have no consequences because I'm not a judicial person? Or are you going to say, now there's spheres of judiciality?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So there's a categorical error being made. You're talking about in terms of hierarchy. What I'm talking about is
judges.
Yeah, I'm saying but I'm just setting that apart as another category. If we look at a different category in which you're equals, not your superiors, not your subordinates, you're equals. So you are the head of your household. Your neighbor is the head of their household. So you're equals. You smash someone else's sprinkler on accident. And they, Jesus says, should forgive you for that. Now, they don't have to. Yeah, they could take you to court. They could make you pay every penny. They could. It's not like it's...
So you're saying that, again, this is back to spheres. Like, you may be a judge then, but that's in your house.
Yeah, you could look at it that way.
Because when you say judicial, and that's why they have the civil authority, and that's what gives them the authority to judge. Well, households judge too.
Yeah, we're talking about people on the playing field. So
well, then people would even say in your analogy, well, the playing field's not equal if you talk about believers versus unbelievers. Then it's not fair still.
Well, it's not like one is subordinate to the other. So it is still equal. We're all human beings. But if you are an elder at a church who wrongs another elder of the church, then you can seek forgiveness. If it's an elder wronging a congregant, then there's a different thing that needs to happen because there's a subordination thing going on, or vice versa. But if you are in this equal standing with your neighbor, or if you're an elder and they're an elder, or you're a president and they're a president, or you're a king and they're a king, then you could forgive their debts against
this
you.
could get really complicated because
maybe we should pull back out of this because there's some other things I was going to talk about.
Yeah, because I was like, man, this can get semantical at some point. Yeah.
So you bring up such an excellent point where you have the biblical Christ-centered idea of forgiveness, and then you have humanity, which we're all trapped in this guise of humanity. So the question becomes, where do you draw that line in the sand? How much can you say, I forgive you, without it impacting your ability to function? Now, again, we're given the commands to go out and preach. We're given the commands to be charitable. It's difficult to do that, I believe, when you have no resources. And if humanity as a species, because we are basically selfish and self-centered, we're going to take advantage, and again, "we're" is the general idea of humanity, not individuals, but humanity in general will take advantage of situations that it sees where it can get the upper hand or get an advantage. So, unfortunately, you have people out there that will look for weakness, that will look to take an advantage. And it's difficult in a fallen world to look at that and say, well, I'm just going to let them take advantage of me, and I'm going to say, I forgive you for doing that. But at what point do you defend yourself? At what point do you say, this is wrong, and I need to do something to protect myself? And that goes as far as the thought I've always had. If you went back and looked at tribes, and you had a tribe that was absolutely pacifists, they will not raise a hand to defend themselves. So you have another tribe that comes in and says, well, they have a lot of good stuff and we want it. And they come in and they start to fight them, and the pacifists don't defend themselves. They're going to get wiped out, and the aggressors are going to take their stuff. So what good does that situation do? The pacifists had a great philosophy for living in peace and harmony, but it didn't do any good when it was threatened, because they had nothing to defend themselves and they were wiped out. So now what good does that philosophy do?
Where do you tie in your construct of sacrifice? That's what you talked about earlier.
Yeah. And again, this is the difficult part. This is the hard part. It's not easy. It's finding that line where you can make that sacrifice, but still be able to continue. I mean, the ultimate sacrifice is sacrificing your life. That's obvious. And there are situations that, that we might be called to, that God will ask us to sacrifice our life. And that is the ultimate sacrifice. But that's going to end it then. You're not going to be able to preach. You're not going to be able to be charitable. There's nothing after that. But if that's what God wills, then...
Is it really sacrifice if it's just convenient? Like if it's doable? Or is that just not charity?
I mean, think about being charitable. I mean, God says tithing 10% to the church, but then it says, talking about being charitable. Yet, at what point does that impact us living day to day? I mean, if we were ultimately charitable, everything we would make, we'd give away. But then again, how would we feed ourselves? How would we feed our families? How would we keep a roof over our heads? In modern day society, how would we keep lines of communication open so that we could keep doing what we're doing here? There has to be reasonable and I would say reasonable sacrifices, wherein we still keep the resources to be able to do what we need to do, and yet still not be selfish, still being able to reach out. And, it's funny, but, I think about, I read a lot of comic books. I'm a big comic book fan. I think about Superman. Interesting character, godlike powers, right? And even he struggles with being everywhere all the time. Because his abilities, he's aware of what's happening. He can hear people asking for help, accidents occurring, fires occurring, but he's one individual. How much can he cover? Someone has got to, eventually he can't be at two places at once. So someone's going to be hurt. And I think that's an interesting analogy for us, when we're called to be charitable and to be forgiven. Like, there are limits, I think, of doing that. And it goes back to anything that a Christian is called to do. You do the best you can.
Well, there's nothing that I'm aware of in the Bible that says you have to give everything you own to charity. Obviously, that wouldn't make sense anyway, because then then someone would have to give you everything they own, and it would just keep getting passed around. It's like some of the stuff you just got back would be stuff that you previously owned. You just gave to somebody, now they're just giving it back to you, and it's like, this is weird. There was the tithes, and then the offerings, and then if you had a field of land, you could let the homeless people, the hungry people, eat the corners of it or the edges of it, but not all of it. Obviously, if they were eating all of it, then that could be stopped. But to answer your other question, about pacifists, if there's a tribe of pacifists, and this happens all the time. Yeah, pacifists get wiped out all the time, because that's not enough. Being a pacifist is not enough. You have to use God's word as your shield, like David did. And the other psalters, they say, your law, O Lord, is my shield against wickedness. And because they're following the law, they say, your angels guard me because I'm following your law. So if you have a tribe of pacifists who are specifically Christian and they're specifically following God's law, yeah, no harm would befall them. That's what Scripture says so many times. But you have to. It's not just about. And see, we're going to go really deep into this other area. I'm trying to stay away from this area.
You can't help but go off tangent.
But it has to do with our relationships with other human beings. Because, like Jesus told that rich young ruler who said, I've been keeping the law. He says, that's great. So you're at zero. Now you need to go in the positives, sell everything you own, and give to the poor.
Yes.
He wasn't telling his disciples to do that. He didn't tell the other people to do that. He just told this one man to do that. And that people often overlook that and say, well, he's telling all of us to do that. It's like, well, he didn't. He was talking to one person. He was not talking to everybody. He could have, as soon as that rich young ruler left, he could have turned to everybody and said, and you guys need to sell everything you own too and do what I just told him. But no, it was for that specific man, because he's been keeping the law. Jesus didn't say, no, you weren't. He said, you've been keeping the law. Fine. But now you need to do the other part. Go in the positives by selling everything you own, like he just taught his disciples to do, not selling everything they own. But he said they needed to give different sacrifices. And it's all out of love for God and for each other. We're supposed to be bearing each other's burdens, which means sacrificing. Like if you're trying to buy a house and you don't have enough money, and I say, I'll help you, I'm going to bear some of your burden. Let's say I bear 25% of it. So now I'm going to pay out of my bank account 25% of your new house. That is what it looks like, me bearing your burden. It's costing me. And this is, again, forgiveness. I am wiping the down. I'm not expecting anything in return. Just like what Jesus said, when you invite people to your banquets, don't invite rich people. They're going to pay you back. You already know that. Invite people that cannot pay you back. And then your rewards will be great. Anyway.
Let me say that God can't steer a ship that's sitting still. And the thing is, you need to take action in order to be guided by God. Sitting in any situation no matter what it is, isn't going to do any good. The decisions you make are not going to be perfect, and they're not always going to be right. Whether you choose to intervene or not intervene, you can't, unless you had the ability to see which path each of those takes, you'll never know. You'll never know if intervening was the right thing to do or
that's why I think it's interesting.
it.
That's why I was leading to that's why I was asking the first question, which is doesn't there have to be a fine line? And doesn't there have to be accountability and structure and order to say there's a fine line where we say we can't cross this line? There has to be discipline here. Yeah. And that's what started this whole line of questioning. Right. I think there needs to be.
I think loving your neighbor looks like if you know that there's a child across the street being abused by a grown man or woman, you need to call the authorities because they're the one in authority.
Right. So there has to be a fine
proper
line.
Channels.
You can't just say turn the sheet.
Procedure.
You can't just say, "Oh, I forgive you." You can't say that.
While
there has
you're
to be
sitting
this
there
fine line.
thinking about it, that child may lose its life.
Right. So
I wonder what the just thing to do here is.
No,
Let's get Platonic and philosophical. It's like you can't.
No, that's why I was
trying
trying to make the point. You can't do any of that. You just have to have a fine line and say, you just have to have an order. You have to say you can't go this far. You can't take advantage of grace. You have to have a point to where you say there needs to be discipline. There has to be a function of authority and accountability.
That's right.
Right. You can't just say, I'm going to turn my cheek, or I'm just going to forgive you, or I'm just going to give everything away. There has to be a fine line. If there isn't, then you won't act. You'll just say, I'll turn my cheek. Got to take care of it. Got to do it. Not me. You have to at some point say, no, you have to do something. You have to do that.
You can. If somebody hits you in a cross section, it's their fault. Yeah, you can. Yeah, you have to call the police, obviously. You can. I guess you can just let them off. And that's what I'm saying. Like, would it be so wrong for us to do that? You let them off the hook. Yeah, it may be $50,000 that you have to pay out of pocket. And if you don't have that much money, then maybe you should make a deal with them. Say, hey, I'll forgive you $5,000, but you need to give me $45,000 or something. You can set the limit, and to the degree of that limit that you set, and the degree of sacrifice you make, God is watching. He's a just judge, so He will bless you on this earth too with that. That's the promise throughout the entire Old and New Testament.
But I just think, if there isn't a fine line somewhere, a static line, people will find means to, because there's open gates for trying to take advantage of that.
And you think they're going to outsmart God? Like He doesn't know these loopholes that man is going to
No, it's not about outsmarting God. It's about protecting abuses. That's my whole thing is if there isn't a static function, then people, of course, I believe God will do what is just, but on the surface level with people will abuse people. Of course, I believe God will take care of that in His means. But on the surface level, this will open the door for abuses if there isn't a static line for accountability for bad actions and church discipline for bad actions.
And where does our responsibility come in? Like responsibility as a Christian, responsibility as a fellow human being. I mean, again, take religion and faith out of it and just look at people living together. At what responsibility do we have to safeguard other human beings from harm, or abuse? I mean, I think there's a moral obligation there too.
Because I agree with everything colleagues saying. We have to take action. But that was actually my point when I was saying that, is that there has to be a line. But,
but I'm not going to become Batman and I become a vigilante.
And I agree with colleague too. Like if you are gracious in those situations, or we can call it sacrifices, then of course God sees that. But you have to be careful on where you draw those lines, because some people are more vulnerable than others. Some people are more malicious than others. And
the people in the vulnerable situations are usually powerless. That's why they're oppressed women.
That's true.
Women are powerless. Even if they wanted to forgive or not forgive, they don't have a choice. They're just going to keep on getting it. Children, again, they're vulnerable. Someone who doesn't have 50 grand on the spot is vulnerable. So you can be gracious to them, or you can have them put in prison, like Jesus says. But Jesus is then going to turn to you and say, "I forgave you of all your debts. So why didn't you go forgive the one that was indebted to you?" That there's literally a parable about that.
I can hear people just going to say the function, which is, doesn't that enable people for more bad behaviors?
And, the disciples probably thought the same thing. And of course, this is the hard road that Jesus walked us and talked us into doing. This should be the standard that we should be looking up to, not what the modern theologians are saying. We should just live like Jesus never said these things, or we'll just hyper spiritualize everything, so that way we can dampen the blow of, because if even though I'm a rich theologian, if someone hits me in the car, and I could forgive him, but I'm not going to, because that's not what Jesus was saying there.
No, I think most Christians believe that, which is God sees my actions and he's going to bless me for being sacrificial or charitable. I think a lot of Christians believe that, regardless how the magnitude of they take that. And I do believe most Christians believe God is a just lawgiver and he sees people hurting me and taking advantage of me, and he's going to do something about it, especially those who are abused. I'm sure they feel that. I don't think anybody, unless they're more radical on the spectrum, would deny that basic function. But I think as those who are watching these events, not being actually affected, we have to be the ones that draw a fine line to saying, when do I engage and when I don't? And especially if you're leadership, this even is more important, because your neglectance to do something can harm a magnitude, or your action on something could actually harm a magnitude. So it even gets more complicated, because yes, we still want to be gracious and sacrificial, but there has to be a point to where it doesn't spread, because there are people who will take advantage of those things. And yes, and that still doesn't deny that I do believe, yes, God is the just lawgiver. He will take care of the things we are forgetful for or neglectant on, but there still will be abuses.
Yeah, I think it boils down to a matter of conscience as well. Making those decisions, drawing those lines. It has to be that. It has to boil down to your individual, your system, your philosophy, your beliefs, your conscience.
Well, I do, like I say, I do agree that the Bible encourages these ideas and also explicitly shows you examples on how to practice and how to function in these lights. But I don't know, maybe this is more of a word to leadership, because the average person that's not in a leadership position, they're just, it's a one layer thing. It's a person to person thing. Leadership, if you don't put out a fire, it's going to burn the whole building down. And there's many people in this building. It's not just my house. Now there's many people in this house. And so maybe it's more of a cautionary idea to that. For me, I'm thinking that it's like my decision can affect many, comparative to just, if I was walking down the road and I see this isolated event. Well, that's very different than if I'm inside of a church function and I'm leadership. This can affect many people. And maybe that's why it's more something to scrutinize in my mentality. But yeah, I don't think anything colleague has said is wrong. It's just there's layers to that people have to be more careful about.
Well, at least it's one step closer to the biblical format, instead of just complete nothingness and complete groping around the darkness. Like, we don't know anything of what to do. At least it's a few steps closer, as we are given orders on what to do in these situations, I believe. So,
well, getting back to the point, what's the next layer you want to address?
So, to bring it back around, talking about relationships, and obviously the things we've talked about are very important, and they do tie in with having relationships with other people, obviously. But getting back to that one-on-one idea, especially when I started out thinking about this, I started thinking about how men and women interact with each other in today's society, and how I feel we've gotten to a point where it's almost like, we have toxic masculinity and militant feminism. And it's like, how do we ever expect men and women to have relationships when it's almost an adversarial, like it's a battle, it's a war. So, my thoughts were using a biblical basis to try to bring that back around. And again, it may have been illusionary when I was young, but it seemed to me as though there was a set of unwritten rules of decency and mutual respect when you were having a relationship with someone. You didn't take advantage of it. You didn't like there was a give and take. Like, I make a joke about the fact that when I was growing up, you'd always think about, well, I wonder if I'm going to get a kiss on the first date, and that was the whole anxiety. Oh, I wonder, should I kiss her? Should I not? And I think today it's devolved to, gee, I wonder if I'm going to sleep with this person on the first date. Like, I wonder if I'm going to, get lucky, if I'm going to score. And I mean, that's such a radical change in thinking. And I feel it's pervasive in our society. And I'm sad to say that I know Christian families that their children behave in this fashion with their partners. And it's just accepted. And that's, to me, it's kind of heartbreaking, on top of the fact that I think it's detrimental to our society.
Yeah, you would think that the church would try to remedy this situation. Maybe they are. But one popular ministry, you guys have probably heard of Right Response Ministries, right? If you haven't, have you heard of Joel Webbin?
Mm-hmm. That Christian nationalist guy.
Yeah, he's a Christian nationalist. He says a lot of stuff that Douglas Wilson says, and Stephen Wolfe. He has a lot of the similar thoughts. Now, I don't know if they would go with him this far, but they have gone with him even on the racial matters, and even as far as saying women shouldn't be voting, but it should be men. It shouldn't really be men either, but the household should vote, which really just means the head of the household, which points it back to men. But he should be conversing with his wife, and they could make a case for this. But Joel Webbin goes to that next step, and I don't know how many will go with him. He says that women are NPCs. Have you guys heard that? He says they're non-player characters. He even spells it out for us, too, if we didn't know.
So they're non-thinking individuals.
Yeah, well, for our audience,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, not for you guys. I know you guys know what NPCs are. I'm saying for our audience who don't know what
Like
that
a video
means.
game caricature.
Yeah.
Right.
Non-player character. So this is the video where he says it. The title is "Women Are NPCs and How Men Can Save Them." I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And then, so what's interesting is he actually says, well, it's not me saying it. It's actually my wife saying it. So, but then just before that, a minute before that, he says, and I'm not going to use my wife as a shield. That's what the enemy wants me to do. But then it seems like he uses his wife as a shield. He doesn't even want to say it. It's like, even that this is something so weird to say. You're going to say your wife says this, not you. I'm going to play the clip. It's only 10 minutes and 13 seconds long, so you guys can watch it on your own. It's not Right Response Ministries anymore. Apparently that show got canceled or something by YouTube. It's called NXR Studios, I think, or NXR.
By these wicked rules. I'm not going to put my wife out in front of you in order to appear softer. I'm not going to do that. My wife is a mother. She has 5 little children. She's busy at home. It takes all of her time, and she's staying in that role. And I'm not going to have her come out here and hold her up as a shield to protect myself in a self-centered way from my critics. That's wicked. It's cowardly, and God will not bless it.
Okay, so he makes this big statement, right? This is only 3 minutes and 24 seconds in. Then a few more seconds later.
No compromise on biblical patriarchy. Now, that disclaimer out of the way, what I was going to say is that my wife, if she was here, she would tell you. She'd say, my husband is absolutely right. Women, she would say this, women are NPCs, non-player character. Meaning what? Meaning all the men have to do is win. You beat the zeitgeist, right? You have to beat the final boss, right? The gay race communism final boss. You got to go in there, you got to beat him, and then you replace him as a righteous, God-fearing Christian man. And then you say, these are virtues, and these other things are vices.
Okay, so he goes on into saying how men need to take over and then women will follow because women are NPCs. And let me rephrase that. It's not him saying it, it's his wife. He also has a debate with Ruslan and God Logic, who are their famous evangelical YouTube channels. They're just normal Protestant people. And Joel Webbin and Todd and Griffin, who are also, I think they're elders of his church as well, debate these two on interracial marriage. And there's a point, you guys can look it up. It's everywhere. Everybody's talking about it right now. It's the talk of the town. He says if Vodi Bakum had a daughter, he would, or a son, actually a son, because Joe Webbin has, I can't remember how many daughters. If Vodi Bakum's son wanted to marry one of his daughters, he would suggest that she wouldn't. Because he actually says in this debate, it is wild. He says for every black Protestant, for every one black Protestant man, there's 10 white Protestants who would be better suited for my daughter. So he says, yeah, he actually mentions Vodi Bakum's son would suit my daughter. And if that's what she really wanted, then yeah, but I would also tell her there's 10 white guys who would also suit her.
This is now he's arguing about the cultural inference, which is there's a black culture and then there's a white culture.
Yep.
And he thinks, and so he's trying to go around the racial function by calling it cultural intermixing instead of just pure racial intermixing.
Yeah. And what's crazy about all this is if you guys listen to this, which I encourage everybody to listen to what he has to say, because he's a Christian nationalist. So what's crazy is Douglas Wilson so how Joel Webbin explains how this all works is exactly how Douglas Wilson explains how this all works in his video on interracial marriages. It's only a 4-minute and 30-second video. Douglas Wilson does on his channel, Canon Press. And again, I'm not always trying to, hark on Douglas Wilson. I actually like him. I love his commentary on Revelation and everything. So don't sue me, Doug. But
actually do.
Yeah, because I'll forgive you.
I won't.
Hey, even a broken clock is right twice a day. So
yeah, unless it's digital, then it's just never.
You're killing me.
Now
You're killing me, Smalls.
See, I'm arguing with CNN right now and OnlyFans, but this guy, Douglas Wilson, is not probably going to say everything Joel Webbin says, but now everybody's wondering because he's not refuting what Joel Webbin's saying. He has the same explanation on how this all works as far as interracial marriage and why we shouldn't do that. But Douglas Wilson's not going to actually say it on public forums, of course. But you have to wonder, if the Christian nationalists ever have their day and they ever take over America, is this what it's going to look like? We're going to get used to calling women NPCs, maybe other people who don't agree with us NPCs, and we're going to create this whole system. We're going to bring segregation back.
Well, I guess, I don't want to touch into it, but yeah, this is where it gets to that theological conversation, complementarianism versus egalitarianism. And I think there can be a moderate stance on both, but the hyper ends is where I guess that's where things get nationalized. Of course, you see things when it's extreme. And of course, if you take things to its logical consistency, you will get to the extreme point because that's where the premises end. And that's what's hard. Is there a spectrum? Is the Bible creating a spectrum? I guess is what people have to figure out. Or is the Bible saying something very explicit and there is no interpretation? If so, then the extremes are true because there should be no room for interpretation. But if there is, then these extremes are the things you should stay away from. But that's why that has to be talked about. Because, on the complementarian end, yes, women have to, it's not just a helper anymore. Now you're an NPC. Take away the 19th Amendment. You don't have no right to vote.
Yeah, but I don't think you have to go that way.
No,
I don't think that's a necessary.
That's what I'm saying. That's
conclusion.
what I was trying to say is like if you go to the extremes, that's where it ends up. And on the other end, it's the other end where now you have exclusively radical feminists saying men are stupid and men should never be pastors and leaders. Look what they do. They're oppressors and women need to take over and women need to be the leaders because we're more compassionate, we're more sensitive, and we're more like Jesus than men. So it goes on the other side of the spectrum too. And so they're both radical. And so the question really is the Bible showing more of a spectrum of interpretation, which is more in the middle, or is the Bible very explicit and it tells you to go to these farther ends? But that's where this weird conversation starts to lead. And that's probably a more semantical conversation. But How does all this tie for you guys into what you guys see the relationship of men and women? Because that's a radical thing to hear,
Well,
colleague.
I'm gonna throw my elder opinion in here to comment on what we just saw.
Experienced.
Experience, yeah. This may be a radical thing to say, but I don't believe in race. I believe race is a human construct that was created to segregate us. I believe we have one race. It's the human race. And that's it. That's it. We're all human beings. We are different human beings. We look different. We think differently. Culturally, we may behave differently, but we're the same species. We are all humans. And again, because of the fall, these lines, of demarcation have been created to separate us. And I think what this person is saying, in my opinion, is absolutely reprehensible. There's no reason why any two human beings can get married. I mean, race should, like I said again, race is a construct. It should never be a consideration.
So let's take that for 1 second.
Getting back, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just 1 second, because so let's say the audience agrees. All right, race, it's a construct. Then I can hear some of the audience asking, would you say the same about sex? Or is the sex a construct? Because that's where the next question was. You had the brevity to say race is a construct, yet people see these things. And so they would say, I see something. And then the next question would be, well, do you believe sex is a construct, even though I see something?
I'm going to change your name from host to curveball.
Why don't we just say there's one race and two sexes?
Yeah, we could. I'm saying I can hear the audience. I'm just projecting an audience question.
I understand. And that's what I would say, because biblically, I believe that's what the Bible says. Now, that's not to say that there aren't going to be people out there, again, that are falling in areas where, as fallen human beings, there's going to be these situations. And we should be loving, compassionate, respectful, but look at the situations. I think people like this guy Webben is exactly why we have non-Christians out there saying, well, look at what's going to happen if they get in power. It's going to wind up like the Handmaid's Tale. And no wonder they're scared, because you have people like this saying, oh yeah, well, women are going to, be NPCs and they're not going to be able to vote. I mean, that's just, I don't know. It boggles my mind that people can actually have that opinion in this day and age and claim, I don't know, again, you're getting down into the weeds, but to claim to be biblical and saying God's will. But I never, ever had an indication in my study of the Bible where God said that women needed to be second-class citizens and that any race should be a second-class citizen.
What's crazy? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to end with the fact that, God said, love one another as I have loved you. And we know God's love is absolutely perfect. And I think we're called to love one another in that instance. And it's not that we won't have disagreements. It's not that we won't have fights. But if you're drawing lines based on cultural or, racial, it's wrong. And I'll leave it at that.
So in that interracial marriage debate with them, the Rustlin and God Logic is a black man. Rustlin is I can't remember what race he is. He said he's like the OG white guy or whatever, because he precedes all of them or whatever. I can't remember. He's funny. So they repeatedly ask Joel Webben and his crew for scriptures. And throughout the debate is about 3 hours long. Repeatedly, they ask, do you have any scriptures? Do you have any scriptures? Do you have any scriptures? Because they keep using scriptures. The other side of the table, they don't use one scripture. They keep saying, well, you have to look at the bigger theme. You have to look at the bigger theme, the bigger picture. And they just keep using logic, and they never use any scriptures. And then the follow-up after the debate on Joe Webbin's channel, NXR Studios, they talk about the aftermath of the debate, and they're like, you can clearly see. Joe Webbin actually starts saying, you can see who clearly won that debate. And anybody who thinks otherwise, they have a low IQ. And all the low IQ people think that we lost the debate because they kept telling us to look for scriptures. And it's not what it's always about all the time. Like, and they use these wild examples of underage marriage and weird stuff like that. So anyway, he calls everybody who thinks, and again, this is just, it's not even how debates work. There's no winner. It's just, but he seems to think there is. Like, he won the debate.
Well, that's why I have to correct you, colleague. They weren't using logic. They were using propositions and rhetoric. If it was logic, you could have a syllogistical premise, then deduction, and then the deduction is just a conclusion of the premises, and you can't really argue that. But if you're just throwing out, here's a big picture.
Well, no,
if you disagree with me, you're wrong.
They did have premises.
You have low IQ.
Well, they did have premises. Yeah, I know. That's the after the debate, the review. That's another wild thing. But at least you can. That's why I think people should watch it, so people know what is getting popularized now. Sometimes I wonder if Joe Webbin is some kind of governmental person placed here on purpose. Yeah, some kind of guy, because you could tell the guy. So I struggled with our last video that we put up. I still struggle with it. I'm debating if we should take it down because of this very reason. I actually reminded myself of Joe Webbin. If you guys watch any of his stuff, which I do, just so I can see how not to behave, anytime he's in an interview with people, he'll have experts on his show, experts, theologians, scholars, and he doesn't let them talk. He himself takes up the entire airtime. He lets them talk for like 5 minutes out of an hour. And it's like, what did you bring them on here for? And you could tell they're frustrated. Like, they have all this stuff to say and give. He'll ask questions, and then he'll just answer his own question. And then he just repeats himself over and over and over again. And that's where I'm like, man, you cannot, I don't know. And everybody can see it except him somehow. I know people have talked to him about it.
Well, I think that's actually the epitome of a psyop. Think about what any large agency would want to do. Let's say it's a corporation. They'll bring a whole slew of doctors. These are the real experts. The CEO knows nothing about none of this. But they're up there and they don't even talk. They're just this picture of authority. So you can say whatever is the correlation of a psyop, the psychological thing. You now just believe whatever the CEO is saying is right because of this slew of experts are here. And they may come up to the stand and say one thing, yes, I agree with this, this, and this. And then the CEO comes back in and says, see, and that's why they're just here to make you believe it's true. But we can't really let them talk because they might say something that goes against the narrative. So we're just going to use them as a picture front. And they've agreed to come on here, right? So of course they agree with me.
Yeah, he may as well be behind a podium with the people standing behind him like in some kind of presidential thing. You know, you just have all these doctors behind you as if they back everything you're saying. It's just an illusion.
Like a press release or something. Oh man.
The NXR Studios is a new channel, just like other channels. You know, they start fresh. You'd think they'd start at like 1, 2, 100. No, they're already into hundreds of thousands of subscribers already. They just started this channel, NXR. It went from Right Response Ministries to NXR. And the transition was so quick. I was like, that is weird. Like, maybe they just bought a channel with people already on
Or it just shows you that they have a lot of influence with a lot of people that resonate in that thought. And unfortunately, those are people who are hearing this not as just like a commentary channel, but they take this as a biblical channel, as something that should influence your walk with God and other believers. Now, that's the scary part. So that's why it's important that people put out a contrary narrative, because regardless if it gets airtime or not, at least it's there because these people will get the airtime. So reverting back, what would be the response to somebody like Webben.
That goes back to what I said in the beginning. When both parties are giving 100%, I mean, that's, you're not going to be able to give 100% if you're an NPC. There's actually, this does bring in something that you said earlier, host, that I wanted to address, and I forgot. You were talking earlier about equality and fairness, and it's interesting because I personally believe that this world isn't fair at all. There's nothing fair in this world, and I mean, the proof of that is the fact that if it was fair, we'd all be condemned. So, when people talk about fairness, and I hear a lot about, well, why is it fair that so-and-so has, to make all this money and they have a nice home and they don't have to worry about this or that? Or, why is it fair that, I was struck down with an illness and this person's completely healthy and they're terrible people? It's because the world is not fair.
But what is fair? If nothing is fair, then what do we receive?
Well, I think it's.
That's why I think
is it fair that you receive what you deserve? I mean,
well, that's why I asked a question about the construct between fairness and equality. I think when people are thinking about it's not fair, what they're really saying, it's not equal.
Right.
I believe everything is fair if you're being honest and you don't readjust the skew. Okay. It's equality that makes people angry. That's why all the debates are about equality. When somebody says that's not fair, that's because they're re-skewing the perspective. I would say it's not fair compared to what? That's when we need to readjust what you're scaling it. Then it's fair. Okay. Because if you look down at somebody lower than you, that person will say it's not fair. Well, I would say because they're re-skewing the fairness. Now, if you're talking about equality, like everybody should have everything equal, that doesn't exist and it never will exist. So when people are fighting for these arguments, I would say it's because they're altering the idea of equality comparative to fairness. Fairness is if you're being honest with yourself, then you can say things are fair in perspective. But if you're saying, I want everything to be equal, that's a utopian fairy tale.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you that. I'll definitely give you that. Yeah. I had another thought. Senior moment. Sorry.
I want to really connect back into biblical relationships as the construct is and love. So we talked a little bit about relationships. Did you have anything else you want to add about relationships?
Well, as far as marital relationships and non-marital relationships go, something came across my feed that was pretty interesting, and it has to do with sexual gratification and satisfaction inside of marriage versus outside of marriage, even in today's age, which I found really interesting. This blew my mind, assuming what these guys are saying is true, and it is because it's on TikTok. So,
shout out to Webben in his TikTok category.
Well, he's on YouTube, so that's the false side of the internet.
If it's on the internet, it's got to be true, right?
Of course. Well, everybody ought to take this with a grain of whatever your preference is.
Statistically speaking, do you know who's having the best sex in America? When people report their satisfaction with their sex lives, do you know who's...
I heard this. I've heard this too. It's typically people who are further along in life.
I think it's early 50s of married couples. It's people who have been married to the same person and only had sex with that person for more than 20 years.
Okay. Yep, that makes sense.
Yeah. It's the old people. It's your parents.
So young couples, the best is yet to come. And
you aren't that good yet.
Thanks for helping. Well, we just made you think of your parents and your grandparents right now.
So I tried to find the statistics on that. I couldn't find any for or against it. So I'm just, maybe he has it, maybe not. I don't know. I can't ask the guy. But I found that to be pretty interesting, if that's the case. That's just not what I thought. So it blew my mind.
Yeah, I don't know how you really prove that because there's so many variables when it comes to sexual proclivities, sexual desires. I mean, males, it could be testosterone levels, libidos. It could be the same for females. There's so many variables, not just because I'm I'm sure there's a variable of connection, and then there's a variable of I know what this individual likes, and they know what I like, and so there isn't this weird awkward stuff like maybe in very beginning relationships. But that's only one spectrum. Libido plays a big part. Health, exercise, culture. It's like I don't even know how you can quantify that statistic.
But adding all that up, according to the statistics that he's pulling from, the satisfaction. So asking anybody if they're satisfied, are they satisfied with their sex life? And if they're married, you're going to get one answer that yes, it is satisfactory. If they're not married and they're just sleeping around with everybody, they're not satisfied. And I can kind of see that. I mean, it's not what I would have thought. I would have thought that it would be better to, but again, that's the grass is always greener, of course, thinking like a guy here. But it helps level the playing field. If the statistic is true, then it makes me feel better. It's like, well, then it is just an illusion. It's a mirage. The grass is not greener on the other side. It's actually withering.
I would think that it makes sense only in that context of course, younger people, they're not what I guess it's like Jordan Peterson. What do you mean by satisfaction? Because if you're implying the fact that I haven't had enough, then yeah, young people probably are like, I want to experience more with more people. If you're saying, am I having good sex? They would probably say yes. But I guess you have to define what do you mean by satisfied. If it simply means I want more sex.
You can't expect common people in the statistic to be philosophers. You're just going to ask them, are you happy with your sex life? And they'll just give you a simple answer.
Right, and I assume young persons would say no. What they're thinking is, I want more.
Yeah, and if you run into a Jordan Peterson, like, well, what is the word what mean? And what does the word is mean? And what does the word sex mean? And what are we even doing here? And it's like, you can't, that's when you just walk away, go to ask another person.
But it'd be weird if an older person said on a statistic, like if they were on a survey saying no, what you're basically saying is, I'm not satisfied with my wife. But a younger person would say no, because they're not married and they want more. So I would get why an older person would say yes, because they want to believe that they're satisfied with their wife. They don't want another person.
Maybe, assuming everybody's lying, I guess.
I think I might be able to.
Yeah, you can answer that. You're in that generation.
Yeah, old and married. I was going to say I could bring this whole conversation back around and finish it up basically by saying that I think the nail was hit on the head. The idea of relationships and bringing satisfaction. There's a difference between being with the person that you're committed to and that you love, and the physical aspect of that relationship, I think will take it plays an important role, but I think ultimately it will take a backseat to much more deeper, more critical aspects of your relationship. Whereas if all you're in it is for the pleasure and satisfaction, it's you're trying to fill a hole that you will never fill. It is endless. It's like a black hole. And you can try and try and try, and it might be physically pleasing. It might be, you might even say, hey, I feel satisfied. I'm getting plenty, but it's never going to be the same as with a committed relationship with one person whom you love, and you're one flesh. I mean, it's biblical. You become one flesh. And I think that takes the physical to a whole nother level, which isn't just two people being animals with each other.
Yeah, and then there's also just like physical quandaries. I mean, some people, they're incapable of having sex. The accident happens.
Oh, absolutely.
And things like that, and like life happens. And if it's something, and of course that's going to be a hindrance regardless what, we could try to biblically try to usurp the natural proclivities of a person. That's going to be a difficulty regardless. But yeah, if there isn't something more, not to saying that it shouldn't be a part of your relationship. Clearly it should. But if there isn't, then yeah, like natural life happens. And what do you do then? If the relationship isn't more than just that. then you're going to start wandering, and you're going to start leading yourself into trying to find justifications if there isn't something more than just a physical intimacy. But yeah, that itself will be a very big hindrance.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to add too, for the Joel Webbins out there and the people that agree with him, when a passage that keeps coming to my mind, especially concerning prayer, and if you want your prayers to be answered, you need to listen to your wife. You need to actually honor her. So in other words, it's like God is saying, if you're not listening to your wife, I'm not listening to you. I don't care if you think she's a dog, an NPC, or whatever, lesser than you. A passage that comes to my mind, I'll just throw it up real quick. This is 1 Peter 3:7. And this is what Peter instructs the husbands. And this last part of the verse is really interesting. He says, show her honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life, so that your prayers will not be hindered. So if you're not treating her as a fellow heir of grace, even, that's an even higher level, then I wonder if Joel Webbin, if he really believes, let me rephrase that, if his wife, I guess his wife's the one who's saying all this stuff, if any of them actually really believe this, is God listening to their prayers? I would say that they need to go back to the scriptures so that way their prayers are not going to be hindered. Because prayers are conditional. Every single time Jesus says to pray, he says, you can ask for whatever you want if you're keeping my commandments. You can ask for whatever you want if you abide in my word and my word abides in you. You can ask for anything you want if you're following truth and righteousness. Like every single time Jesus talks about prayer, he says the same exact thing. Ask whatever you want, but first you need to be listening. So if you're not listening to God, then he's not listening to you. And he says, and if you want to prove that you love me and that you're listening to me, you need to be listening to your fellow brothers, your fellow heirs of grace, like women, your wives specifically. They are not any lesser or greater than you. They are your fellow heir, and you need to honor her. Like we could translate that word as venerate even. Like what Catholics think of venerating saints, lifting them up, exalting them. You should be honoring. Yeah, you should be honoring and venerating your wife.
We're supposed to be treating them as Christ treated the church, and willing to give up our lives for them. And I think that also means when you say give up your life, it means making sacrifices for them.
Yeah. Otherwise, don't pray because you're wasting your time. And people always ask, they're always like, oh, yeah, well, that's why I stopped praying. Even most devout Christians, I've heard Presbyterian, Baptist, all kinds of different people in different churches saying, oh, well, I used to pray and ask God for specific things, but he never answers. So now I just ask for the blasé generics, like, God bless this guy's day, help Charlie with life or whatever. They don't ask for specifics because they're not actually looking for God to answer them. They know God's not going to answer them. So the question is, why are you even praying? And
God answers all prayers. God answers all prayers. He just doesn't answer them the way you may necessarily want him to answer, or in the time that you want.
I was actually just reading Andrew Murray, who was a Reformed missionary to, I think it was South Africa or East Africa, I can't remember. But he was a missionary, and he wrote a book on prayer. He actually wrote a few books. His one on prayer is really interesting. He talks about, again, the same thing. If God's not answering your prayers, he's not giving you what you ask for, because, Jesus isn't lying when he says, ask for anything you wish, and I'll give it to you, if you keep my commandments. So Andrew Murray expounds on that. He says, that's why you're not getting what you asked. It's not Jesus lying. You're not doing your part of the agreement. It is transactional. He says you need to listen to God so then he can listen to you. He actually says, like, we Christians often think that you can just ask God for something. It's like, yeah, I'll do what you want, God. I'll listen to you, but first you need to listen to me first. Yeah, I'll help that person if you give me a car or give me a house or help me pay my bill right here. Then I'll help you. I'll do what you're saying. But he's saying, no, you got it reversed. He actually says, we have it reversed. You need to do what God's asking you to do first, and then he will do what you're asking him to do. It is a relationship. He's not a genie.
Yeah, it is something hard to think about on the theological side. It's simple on the front side. Like I've always said, you got to treat God as he's real. Like you're talking. I would never talk to another human being like some people talk to God. That would probably seem very offensive, but we think that's okay and good because it becomes a colloquial or some kind of common function of conversation. This is just how we pray, or this is just how we say something. But when I hear people pray, if you would talk to a person that way, they would think you're either incompetent or what you're saying, it has no value. You're not going to really do anything. You have no power. It just seems very belittling because you're not treating it as somebody. You're treating it as just like a anime character or something. You don't really believe that it's just some caricature. But yeah, that's its own construct. But I want to go back to the honor thing because in First Peter talks about that, and also it says, talks about in Romans 12. It says to honor one another above yourself. And so this honor thing is also an important thing because, we should honor, especially those who are married, you need to honor your wife. That's a very important construct to appreciate what Christ did for you. Because Christ, as you lift Christ up, he's also lifting you up because you're glorifying him. In the same sense, he tells the Father, glorify the Son so that the Son may glorify the Father. In the same sense, God gives his glory to us, not that we're sharing or participants or adding to his glory, but we're being a beacon of that glory because that beacon of glory is glorifying God even more. But you have to understand that honor it's a reciprocal function. And it's not supposed to be I have honor or I get honor, but honor is meant to be received and given. So it can be maximized.
Yes.
And so I think if you don't have that understanding, you start. Best way to think about it is hoarding honor, like the old adage: you get all you can all you get, and sit on the can of honor. So I become this big maxim golden chalice, and everybody else, they don't have as much honor as I do, and then you start demanding honor, and then you feel disrespected because people are not honoring you. But where have you given the honor? And you think, why should I? Why should I honor that man down there? But the same goes for the wife. But the deeper question, like a disagreement of the function is, what do you do with people who are theologically wrong? Do you honor them or people who are socially awkward or personally offensive? There's many of those people in the church, and I would say there's many believers like that. How do you honor them and yet still address this awkwardness or contention? Because it tells us in Romans 12 to honor one another above yourself.
Wish I had a cricket button I could push. You could hear crickets.
Well, it's a tough thing because we face it all the time. But we really face it if we're all being honest. I mean, we may not say it, but we face it all the time. So how do we honor that?
I think it boils down to your ability to relate to other human beings. It has an element of your conscience. Are you treating someone with honor, with respect, with fairness? And we're going to get it wrong. I mean, again, it's like doing the best you can. It's like trying to be as close to that biblical standard than you possibly can. And not driving yourself crazy, knowing that you're going to fall short, but and yet striving to do the best you can. And there's going to be challenges, like, interacting with certain individuals. Some are easier to interact with than others, and it's going to be challenging, and it's not going to be easy. But again, fairness, equity, we're all created in the image of God, but that doesn't mean that we don't maintain a uniqueness, and especially in a fallen world. it gives us a uniqueness. So I don't know if that answered your question, but that's kind of the way I feel. You try the best you can with what you're given. I mean, and again, we're given abilities and talents to use. So
But I think we need to honor. We honor all people as image bearers. Like we're all made in the image of God. But then I also, specifically in the question is church people, like theologically disagreeable, or they're socially awkward in the church. Sometimes I could be like, I go up to somebody and say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" And they just, I'm expecting some kind of real conversation, but that's usually not it. They walk away, and now I feel socially awkward. Like I'm just standing here like, okay. And, those kinds of things, but I still need to have this understanding of honor. And then I feel like, am I being honored? And so I think the construct of honor has to be, I value the person because Christ values them, and I need to see them like that. So I honor them as that. But I can't, you don't want to misconstrue the idea of honor and politeness or flattery, because that's the other, that's the pollution of honor, I would think, is flattery. Like you could be a yes man and you could say yes to everything and then say, oh yeah, you're a great person, but you're lying. You're lying. That's a false honor. And so I would say honor is because of the one who honored them. It's almost like a knight. They're a knight because they were honored or knighted by the king. I respect that. But that doesn't mean I respect everything that knight does. So I respect and I honor because you are knighted or honored by Christ as a believer. But that doesn't mean I have to be flattered. I don't have to flatter you. I don't have to give you all these roses that are fake. I don't need to be a fake person. I can still be honest about the discussion. Just don't tell me that I'm disrespecting or not honoring you. I honor you because Christ honors you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to lie about your actions or the conversation, or I'm not going to be genuine in conversation. Right. But don't try to invert that on me, saying, "Oh, you're not respecting me. You're not honoring me as a believer." No, I honor you because you believe Christ, and Christ has honored you, knighted you with His heirship. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be ungenuine.
I think you honor someone even more if they're making a mistake and you call it on them, or if they have something incorrect. I think it's actually a bigger sign of honor and respect to actually bring it to them instead of just letting them continue in their errors.
A lot of passages come to mind. James saying, turning a brother from his errors. Jude saying, snatch a brother out of the fire. Even damaging the very clothes they're wearing. That's not dishonoring to sometimes even cause a little pain in someone's life or discomfort because you try to correct them.
It reminds me of Romans 13. It tells you to put on Christ. Now, I always see honor that way. And again, it just sounds really medieval and all that, but I'm just picturing that kind of construct. They put on this armor, they put on all this, but that's because they're a servant to the king. And that's what actually gives them the honor. They don't have honor of themselves. They have to receive the honor from the king. And then they go do the duties that the king wants. And that's where the honor is. But that doesn't mean this individual is infallible. That doesn't mean you can't correct this individual. Correction is not a byproduct of dishonorment.
Right.
But I think people skew that, and they think that means you're not respecting me or you're not honoring me. Your honor is because it comes from the king. It's not because you are honorable of yourself. You have received that honor, and that's why I honor you, because I see that. I see the king has bestowed honor on you. But that doesn't mean I'm going to be ungenuine. I think that's important because, the passages that colleagues talking about, those are important, but that's not dishonorment. That's actually love. Yeah. If I see somebody falling, if I see somebody walking towards a path that's going to fall straight off the cliff,
absolutely,
I'm not being loving if I'm not trying to deter them from falling off of a cliff. And so, that's not dishonorment. But I think that's where our society thinks. If you're not flattering, if you're not appeasing to everybody's little nuances, then
Right.
you're just a disrespectful person. You're not a real believer. That's not loving. I say no. That's neglectance. That means I don't love you.
The opposite of love isn't hate; it's apathy.
Wise words from the boomer. Fox News. Well, anything you guys want to sum up on this as we wrap up this episode?
Be nice to one another.
Nice.
That's my
We can talk
summation.
about that too.
At the end of the day, just be nice to one another.
I'll sum up with a picture of Christ,
Mm.
an actual picture. Somebody took the Shroud of Turin and made it into real life, which I'm sure you guys have seen videos like this before. I thought this one was probably the best one I've seen. Now, whether the Shroud of Turin depicts some homeless bum or Christ himself, it's pretty cool technology.
This isn't a filter. That dirt on the glass is the shroud image. Watch what happens when it's wiped away. Now ask the real question. What process makes a surface-only imprint like that without paint?
I know there's a lot of debate over whether that is actually Jesus or not. I don't know. I don't want to make images or say that there's images on earth of God or anything in the heavens or anything. But it is fun to speculate. Whether it's Jesus or some homeless guy, we don't know. But I thought that could be the image of love. Because if some homeless guy died, then that sucks. And that would, that's sad. And if Jesus died, that's also sad.
I would agree. In the connotation, you should care for the lowly as much as you care for the highly.
Isn't that what Jesus said? Whatever you did to the least of these.
To at least. Yep. Absolutely. And keep in mind that eventually we're all going to see Jesus one way or another. So.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate the conversation, fellas. I think we talked about a lot. I don't know if we got to cover all of the
we covered everything.
The categories. At least I did in my my notations here, but we covered a lot.
We covered the Shroud of Turin.
Yeah, we covered it all.
There's a lot.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah. But I always appreciate these conversations. It's it gets semantical. It can get that way, but at the same time, there's a lightness to it that I think it's just like hanging out with the fellas, and I think that's important too. We didn't even get into that. Like, what does it mean that iron sharpens iron and all of that stuff? Because that's just as important too.
We didn't have to talk about it because we actively did it.
Right. I was like, well, maybe we don't.
Amen.
Because God is showing through our conversation here that this is what people should be practicing on the regular.
This is a 3-corded rope.
Yeah. It's not easily broken. Yeah. But anyways, I appreciate the conversation as always, fellas. I look forward to it next week. And hopefully you guys too. Hopefully you guys are also listening in. If you guys have any questions, comments, things that we didn't address that you think we should. If you guys are interested on us talking about the deeper level about complementarianism and egalitarianism, let us know in the comments. Might do it anyway. We're not sure yet, but let us know what you think and what you want to add to the conversation about biblical relationships and biblical love. But until next week, that's colleague, that's elder, and I'm host. And this has been another episode of Table Talk TV. See you guys in the next one.